If you came to this video and you were surprised that you didn't know there was a lead problem in Chicago, and you're even more surprised that the news agencies hadn't reported on this story, you've come to the right video. Hi, I'm Dr. Hampton, a board certified family and obesity medicine doctor and a master's in nutrition and functional medicine. And I'm on a mission to help you achieve metabolic health. And that's why I created my engaging, easy to remember acronym, a nest and a rope. And today I'm going to focus on the P in the rope, which deals with pollutants. And the pollutant that we're talking about today, of course, is lead. Now, what led me to wanting to do this video was an article in The Guardian, not the local newspaper, but The Guardian, that spoke about the lead levels being at shocking levels in Chicago. And what they found when they looked at the research, which was gathered over a few years, is that 1 in 20 of the tap water tests performed on thousands of residents had high levels of lead, and 1 out of 3 had more than what was permitted in bottled water. And when you think about this, we have 24,000 tests, right? 1,000 homes had lead levels that exceeded federal standards. And that was just based on the test they did. Imagine when you think about the 400,000 lead pipes that still are in existence, that many of which weren't tested. So if you really take this data and say, well, what does that mean for all of these other people? It means that a whole lot of folk probably have lead in their pipes. Now, one of the reasons why Chicago ended up with higher lead levels than other cities is because they had laws on the book that were before 1986, which basically said that lead pipes were the standard. And then, of course, when that ended, the need to replace the pipes, there wasn't a sense of urgency. And that's why there's so many homes now that are at risk for having too high of a level. Now, you may not be surprised by this, but when they looked at the top 10 zip codes where there was high lead results, the majority of those neighborhoods, as you could imagine, were in Black and Hispanic homes. And there was one home where the level was 1,100 parts per billion, which is 73 times the EPA limit, which should be no more than 15 parts per billion. And you already know, you've heard about lead. There are times when we've talked about it in great detail in communities, but the bottom line is that lead does cross the blood-brain barrier, and because of that, it can have negative consequences affecting the IQ level, the behavioral disorder risk, and of course, the performance in reading and math. And that's a devastating impact because these things many times are not reversible. Now, I take this personally because I am a family doctor, obesity doctor on the south side of Chicago. And as you can see from this image, the red areas are on the south side of Chicago where I work. Listen, it's impacting my patients, and it impacts my team members, and it's very disappointing. And I also grew up on the west side of the city, and there's also red areas that are lit up in those areas as well. As you can also see in downtown Chicago, where you have a more affluent neighborhood, you see white and you don't see the same risk. So it's very disappointing that your income is going to impact your risk. Now, the current mayor, Lori Lightfoot, has made a pledge before, while she was running, that she would address this issue. But since she's been in office, only 180 of the 500,000 lead pipes that need to be replaced have been replaced. So we clearly have some work to do. And, a lot of times you think, well, this is not where I live. You may be watching this video in another part of the country, another part of the world. But the reality is, I thought that too, living in Chicago. This is not Flint, Michigan, where we had the lead crisis. This is not Mississippi, where my wife grew up. This is Chicago. It's the third, largest city in the United States, one of the richest countries in the world. And yet we're still dealing with issues that you would think would affect poor countries, but it's affecting this city as well. So when you look at the EPA's action level for doing something about lead, it's about 15 parts per billion, and it needs to be at least 10% of the samples to not, to be at that level for something to be acted upon. And technically, based on the previous data, Chicago is in compliance. But I would argue, looking at what we just learned, then we're probably not in compliance, and we need to really aggressively address that. We also need to reevaluate what is the standard. Should we have stricter EPA levels to determine that water is safe? And the Food and Drug Administration pretty much believes, they have this standard for bottled water at 5 parts per billion, but the Academy of Pediatrics thinks it should be at 1 part per billion for drinking water, particularly for our kids, because they're at a greater risk of having negative consequences. Now, when you think about the zip codes, there were 4 zip codes on the Chicago South Side, which had results that were at the action level. Something needs to be done. And so if you live in Bronzeville, right, and that's pretty, interesting neighborhood, it's kind of beautiful old homes in that neighborhood. If you live on the South Chicago or East Chicago, and these are Black and Hispanic neighborhoods, the rates are much higher. And there was the zip code on the west side, which is where my kids went to high school at Providence St. Mel's High School, a great school, by the way. They had high levels as well. But there was one affluent neighborhood on the north side. This neighborhood, the homes probably average $500,000. Forest Glen, that's another area. So this is not just about, Hispanic and Black. It's not just about poor and rich. This can impact any and all of us. So we want to take it very seriously. So what I want you to walk away from this video is an opportunity to take action, right? So the first thing is to use a little common sense. Let's let the water flow, right? Let's let the water flow a little bit before we use it. And so if we let it flow and get some of that stale water out of there first, that's one thing we can do. And they do have information about how to do that. I'll share that link about intensive flushing in the show notes. Number 2, got to test, right? You need to know you have a problem, because you may live in a home where the pipes are in better shape. So let's get tested. Let's do some lead testing for your home. I think everybody should consider that. I certainly plan to do that in my home as well. And they do have some programs out there to help property owners to get some free lead service line replacement. So the third thing, of course, is we got to replace the pipes if we have pipes with a lot of lead. There are specific criteria for that. I'll share a link in the notes for that as well for those who live in this area. If you don't live in this area, you need to test the lead in your community, no matter what city you're in, and then find out if your city or town has programs for you. And of course, there is a need for filters. We need to take the water that we're getting and we need to filter it. And they do have really good programs in some cities. I'll share a link for a program that the city of Chicago is involved in. You can fill it out online and then see if you qualify. And while you're waiting and doing all of that, you could probably just look into your own personal filter for your home or something you could take to work. The first is the Survivor Filter Pro Water Purification System. That's one. Number 2, the Aquaphor system. The Brita, we're all familiar with that brand, Brita. And one that surprised me at the price that it offered, which is the Fitz Zero Water Filter, was one of the best when I did a quick review in terms of its ability to purify the water. So, but the most important thing I want you to understand is advocacy. Advocate for what's right. And I suggest you make a difference not only in your home, but in your community. And so if you find you have lead, maybe you need to engage your neighbors, see if they have lead. And if they have lead, maybe you guys need to gather that data and then present that to the local leaders, the local politicians, rather it's the aldermen or whoever who can then act on that information. I think that's really important. Share this video if you have friends or family who you think could benefit from it. If you're trying to achieve metabolic health, it's not just diet and exercise, it's these issues too. And if we avoid things that pollute us, then we'll be healthier. So I hope this video added value to your life. And I really appreciate you coming to the channel. Like, subscribe. And until we have another video, continue to be safe, be well, and continue to protect your nest.